Hello everyone, just a quick disclaimer before we get started. I don't claim that my builds are the best in the game, and I'm sure there are better ways to optimize some of them, but be aware that I do tend to get my builds at least endgame viable. This includes things like arbitration, steel path, eidolon hunts, etc. Now that this is out of the way, these timestamps have been left here and in the description for your convenience. Feel free to skip around, but I'll start with the basics first just in case people don't know how to play this frame. Alright, so let's start with the stats. So the armor is 175, which is 36.8% damage reduction. Baruuk gets a lot of damage reduction in other ways, so this doesn't really matter much, but it's a pretty decent base amount. The energy is 200, which is actually 300 at max. The highest base energy currently in the game, and he's not even a prime. So that's pretty good. Health is 75, that's pretty low. But as I mentioned earlier, he has a lot of damage reduction from other sources, so it's not too big of an issue. Shield is 100 base, so that goes to 300 at max. Again, it doesn't really matter. Sprint speed is pretty snappy at 1.2, which is decent because he does a lot of melee based stuff, so closing the gap is not too bad. He has no prime, and he is acquired by getting max rank with Solaris United, then ranking up Vox Solaris until you can get him. Okay, so let's move on to abilities. Let's start with his passive. So each projectile dodged, each enemy lulled or disarmed, erodes Baruuk's restraint and feels the storm within. So basically the storm within is his 4, which we'll get into soon. As Baruuk's restraint is diminished, he becomes up to 50% more resistant to damage. So basically the damage reduction seems to be linear, so at the lowest restraint being the actual 50% damage reduction. Fortunately, it's not too hard to keep this active, and the restraint bar is found in the lower right. That will be explained pretty soon. Alright, so Baruuk's first ability is Elude. Dodge all incoming projectiles, but only when not attacking. Use it again to deactivate this ability. So it is, in fact, a channeled ability. It starts at a 180-degree arc in front of Baruuk. With some range, it can increase to cover him completely. For every projectile dodged, he loses 1.2% restraint. It drains a set amount on cast and is a channeled ability, which means energy is drained while active. So the drain over time is affected by efficiency and duration, while just the initial cast is affected by efficiency. Okay, so to demonstrate this ability, we're going to spawn some enemies, put that ability on, and as you can see, the bullets go right through me, and my restraint gauge in the bottom right does in fact go down. And this is how you charge your ultimate. It's one of the ways to charge your ultimate. We'll get into that later. And if I'm turned around, I start taking damage. So in an angle from about here to here is where I'll dodge by default, and again that is increased with range. And moving on to Baruuk's second ability, Lull. Calming Wave slows enemies until they fall into a slumber. Enemies broken by damage will be confused and disoriented. So I'll just spawn some enemies to demonstrate this real quick. So basically what you do is you place down a rune, and it lingers for the set duration, and anybody within the range will fall asleep. So it is blocked by line of sight, but the biggest reason to hit this is it lowers Baruuk's restraint by 0.8% for each enemy affected by it. Additionally, if targets take damage, they wake up, but they also suffer a stun. Moving on to his third ability, Desolate Hands. I'm going to just give my own description for this since it's a lot less confusing. Summons daggers around himself that provides 10% damage reduction per dagger. Daggers will seek the first enemy in range, which disarms them, and does a blast explosion to any enemies in the area of the target that was hit. For every enemy disarmed, Baruuk loses 1.6% restraint. If a target was sleeping from lull, they will not be woken up by this ability. The ability can be recast to keep high damage reduction. The number of daggers and damage is affected by strength. Seek range and explosion range is affected by range. And while Elude is active, the range of this ability is doubled. So that is pretty self-explanatory, so we get ourselves some energy. Cast our 3, we now have damage reduction, and we're slowly losing that damage reduction, but that's okay because it can be recast, and it does reach further with Elude. So let's say I have allies within the game, the daggers can actually be shared to teammates, including sentinels, pets, whatever. So allies can share up to 50% of the total daggers that Baruuk can currently carry. So if I have 16 daggers, allies will get 8. Giving the daggers to allies doesn't actually waste your own daggers, but provide your allies all the same benefits as your own. So if I did have 16 daggers and my ally got 8 of those, they'll have 80% damage reduction. Now, of course, these daggers will also seek enemies to disarm them, and in turn will also make you lose restraint. Even though they're getting the disarms, you're losing restraint, which is really, really good. Being near allies can actually benefit both players, which is definitely a good thing. Okay, moving on to his fourth ability, which is actually an exalted melee. It has its own mods and everything. So Serene Storm is powered by the lack of restraint. The less restraint you have, the longer you can have it active. It fills 4% of your restraint on cast and 0.8% per second, so it is channeled, and that can't be modified by mods. You get a flat damage reduction for having it active, which is affected by strength. You can still lower restraint while in this mode with various other abilities, which is huge, and you can keep huge uptimes on this pretty effortlessly. Okay, so to explain this ability a little bit further, there are actually two types of attacks for this ability. So there's the damage of the fist itself, and then the wind that each attack can generate. So the fist generates combo, right? The wind doesn't. So because the wind and the fist are two different instances of damage, you can actually proc both within one strike if you're close enough, which is, 2 attacks in one hit is pretty strong. The wind is basically for attacking targets that are further away. The wind has unlimited punch through, but still is affected by range, of course. You can only send that wind so far. The wind has a guaranteed stagger, which basically means he has even more crowd control than he already did. The wind also reflects projectiles back in the other direction. And lastly, enemies hit by the wind have a chance to be disarmed, which, he's already got so much disarm potential with his 3. Why not give him some more, I guess? So just like, normal melee weapons, they have their own stance. And for the stance on Serene Storm, you just basically have your regular attacks, which just, it's just your basic attacks. His block combo has really good range and attack angles. It also pulls enemies closer on certain parts of the combo, which is very nice. And then we have his slide melee combo, which suspends enemies in the air. It also does a lot of damage. It's his heaviest hitting form of his attacks. And then he has the ground slam, and then the ground heavy slam is supposed to pull enemies in. For some reason it's not doing it for me. I had it working the other day, I don't know why it's not now, but that is pretty much all of his combos. It's worth noting that condition overload doesn't affect the wind, but does actually affect the fist, so bear that one in mind. Alright, so moving on to augments. For the first one we have Endless Lullaby, which is a lull augment. Performing a finisher on a sleeping enemy will retrigger lull for 100% of the remaining duration, and then passively you get extra lull duration. So if we throw that on, and we have, just a little bit of extra duration, a little bit of extra range, just so we can demonstrate the ability, and I'll just put something on that can maybe kill something. So if I put him to sleep, he falls asleep, my ability duration runs out, right? Now that's not there anymore. What I can do is I can bring more Lancers in. If I execute him, it'll drop another ruin for whatever time was left on him. Now, this is pretty good for crowd control. This isn't like a bad augment. It's not really something I would see you needing to use, but it's good. It has its uses, and that's about it. That's really all there is to this augment. Okay, moving on to his next augment, which is actually a Serene Storm augment. Serene Storm augment. Desert Wind is granted plus 250% status chance, and changes its damage type to match enemy weaknesses. Now that is pretty strong, but the status is what really gets my attention. So actually, let's take that off and take a look at his status without it. 15% status. So if I have his augment on, right, let's see what it's at now. Whoops. 52%. That's a lot of status. That's a huge increase. And you know what's really crazy is that is actually affected by strength. So if I have a bunch of strength mods on here, for example, I'll just do a couple just to prove a point. That goes up a lot. That's a lot of status. And this thing already has pretty good crit. The multiplier is a little low, but the crit chance is insane. So when you're having this much status on top of it, and it matches enemy weakness, that's insane. So one thing to keep in mind is condition overload, because I know you guys are thinking about that. As I mentioned earlier, it only applies to the fist. So if I'm back here, Condition overload is not working. I'm getting a lot of status regardless because of my high status, but condition overload does not work back here. I have to actually physically hit an enemy for condition overload to proc. So just bear that one in mind. So yeah, his augments are pretty good. And at this point in the video, I like to answer the question, is this frame Steel Path viable? Can it run arbitrations? Is it part of the Eidolon hunts? Etc. Probably not so good in the Eidolon hunts. He is, however, incredibly good at arbitrations in Steel Path. The armor and levels are a joke to Baruuk with all of his damage resist, especially when you pair that with the damage potential of his Serene Storm augment. He is just dishing out so much freaking damage. He is incredibly good. That being said, we're going to get into his builds. Okay, first build I'm going to get into is my Rage Monk build, which is completely focused on being in Serene Storm as long as possible. It's meant to do a ton of damage, soak up a bunch of damage, and that's pretty much it. I will show gameplay in a minute. So in terms of helmets, you really don't need helmets. You can, I would say Elude is probably the most annoying ability to use with this build just because of the drain. If you want to replace something for whatever, it'd probably be this. So in terms of formas, you're going to want to add 4. So for the aura, you're going to either add a Matter Eye polarity or just do an aura forma if you want it to work with the other build I'll be going over. And you'll need 2 more Matter Eye and a Naraman. Alright, so starting with aura. We're obviously running Steel Charge because we want quite a bit of extra mod capacity. And the melee damage is, in my opinion, this is just a much bigger damage increase over something like Corrosive Projection, plus we need to be able to fit all of our mods. Okay, in terms of mods, we're using the 2 Umbra, Vitality, and Intensify to basically strengthen each other, bring up that low base health that he has as much as possible, as well as giving us some good strength. We're going to be using Transient Fortitude to bring up our strength even further, and Blind Rage even further, because we know that Reactive Storm goes off of strength, so we want as much status as possible. We're running Adaptation, 2 points for max because we want to be tanky, but we also want to be able to fit it in this build. As you can see, my drain is 0 out of 78. And if you're using 2 ranks from the max on adaptation, you're still able to get the full benefit. The only thing you're losing out is 2 seconds, and you just need to get shot 1 additional time to get to the max stack on damage resist. We're running Streamline to try to bring up our efficiency a little bit more. I would say this is pretty much a flex spot. You could put whatever the hell you want here, assuming it fits. Reactive Storm, let's be honest, Baruuk needs it. It's a lot of damage. It's a lot of damage. That's all I have to say. Overextended, so we can try to get our range up as much as possible for Desolate Hands, as well as Lull. And of course, that brings our strength down a little, but that's why we're stacking so much strength. Going to the Exilus, we have Enemy Sense. I do this just so I can see where enemies are. You don't actually have to do this. This is a flex spot. You can do whatever forma you want here if you want a different Exilus. Or don't run one at all. It really doesn't matter. Okay, moving on to his Desert Wind. You are going to want 5 formas. So basically, you're going to add 3 Matter Eyes, and you're going to add 2 Naramans. And one of these Naramans is going to replace the default Vazarin that it comes with. And then that should leave you with an open slot for Sacrificial Steel. Okay, for mods, we are forced to do the default stance, which is totally fine. It's a good stance. First mod is Prime Pressure Point, which, I mean, it's obvious. This is where most of our damage comes from. We have Prime Reach for the extra range. Now, this helps us get our combo multiplier up a lot easier. Without this, it is incredibly difficult to get your combo multiplier because chances are your wind's going to be killing things and you don't even have a chance to hit it with your fist. Next mod is Berserker Fury. Basically, on a melee kill, we get attack speed. Now, attack speed's a great thing. It's, in my opinion, better than... You're always getting kills, so it's better than running something like Prime Fury. Moving on to the next mod is Organ Shatter. So basically, we just want crit damage because we are doing a lot of crit. That being said, we're doing a sacrificial mod for as much crit chance as we can possibly get out of one mod. And then we are running 3 status mods. So we have one 60-60, which is Virulent Scourge. And then I'm running Prime Fever Strike for just a ton of extra damage. And then we have Shocking Touch. All of those 3 combined will give you a little bit of status and a ton of extra damage. Alright, moving on to arcanes. So we're just running the melee arcanes just to buff our damage and attack speed. So strike buffs our attack speed by quite a bit when it procs, and fury, which will pretty much always proc, it has a pretty good chance, will give you extra melee damage. It's that simple. We just want to get extra damage and attack faster. So now, technically, you can use things like Gladiator set on your actual melee. Right, so you use all 3 of these Gladiator mods, and you can actually get the bonus from the crit chance per combo multiplier. Problem is it's not working as intended, and I don't even know if this was intended, so all the footage you're going to be seeing is actually not using these mods because it does damage regardless, but of course having these and then seeing those red crits is pretty nice. It's not required, run whatever you want, but technically this is still in the game for some reason. I don't know why it hasn't been fixed, but that being said, we'll be moving on to Operator School. So for Operator School, we are definitely using Nariman for Power Spike. We want to keep his damage stacked as high as possible, as long as possible. We're not using mods to increase our combo counter or combo duration, so we need to run something like this to keep our extra damage up. Okay, so we're going to get into a fight real quick. And the first thing you want to do is put your damage reduction on, drop a pad, press 2 to sleep everything, and this gives you enough restraint to just absolutely nuke everything with Serene Storm. This is really overpowered. So basically, the way to keep it up, as you can see, I'm running down pretty quickly on that. So what you want to be doing is pressing 2 whenever you run into a crowd of enemies, when you have enough energy. And whenever you run under 9 daggers, which is, you know, your cap on damage resist, you want to be recasting that as much as possible. And that will keep your restraint where it needs to be to use that pretty much indefinitely. So I am going to roll some footage now. And in this, I am running Steel Path. And as you can see, it just totally annihilates that Acolyte with the slide attack. We're going to go into another one. Malice, as you can see, it's just no chance. Not even a chance. Gets up, immediately dies. And here, I just demonstrate that you can just hit through walls with this thing. I mean, it really doesn't matter. If you have enemies that are just trying to hide and shit, it does not matter. And as you can see, it has quite a bit of area damage with primed reach. And that's pretty much the build. Okay, so we are going to go over a Pacifist build, which is just exactly what it sounds like. We're using all of his crowd control to our advantage to just keep everything asleep. And it does not require a Helminth. However, I would recommend if you want to just have a bit more flexibility, you can put something like Rest and Rage to replace one of his abilities to have even more sleep potential. It is a 3-forma build, so you need to forma the aura into a Nariman. If I prefer to have enemy radar, so I see what enemies need to be CC'd or not. Or you can just have an actual aura forma, which will allow you to use my other build. Additionally, you'll need to add a Nariman and a Metarai. Okay, so in terms of mods, we're going to go with the aura first, which is, of course, enemy radar, like I mentioned earlier. I just like to be able to see things on the map. We're using Streamline for efficiency. It's very important that we have efficiency. Unfortunately, we can't use Fleeting because we actually want our duration. We have Endless Lullaby to just augment more duration, basically. And it also gives us a passive that we can benefit off of for performing a finisher on an enemy, which will re-trigger lull. We have Cunning Drift just for the extra ability range because we have max range. Prime Continuity to bring our duration up. Overextended to, again, we're at max range. Constitution to bring more duration up. And Stretch and Reach for more range. I'm using Enemy Sense in the Exilis. You can choose to use nothing, or you can form this out for something else. I highly recommend having good map awareness, though, for a crowd control build. Alright, so moving on to Arcanes. So we have Energize and Guardian. This, I mean, you're really not going to be getting shot much. I'm just doing this as an extra insurance. And Energize isn't totally necessary. You're not really killing a whole lot with this build anyway, so orbs won't really be on the ground. You can use whatever you want. In terms of other requirements, just make sure you have a weapon that can do something. And moving on to Operator School, I definitely recommend Zenuric. The reason why you want Zenuric is so you can keep your energy as high as possible. And now we can just go into a quick how to use. So basically, I mean, it really doesn't get any simpler than crowd control. You just press 2 and wait for things to fall asleep. That's literally all there is to it. Of course, if you're using Helmet and you're not able to get that out in time, you can just, you know, sleep them with your Rest and Rage. You do need to be making sure you are using the darker color emissive. Otherwise, you won't get the actual sleep ability. You'll get the day ability, which is just damage vulnerability. Not typically something you need on this build. So that's literally it. I'm going to roll some footage of how to actually use it in an interception. So literally all there is to it is you cap your first node. Everybody goes to you. You cast your 2 down once enemies start pouring in. And that'll stay on the ground for a second. So you can start capturing another node. And those enemies will just fall asleep. You can use your 1 as needed. Just to prevent damage. But try not to keep it active too much, otherwise you'll just drain all your energy and you'll get screwed later. So while that was down, we were able to capture the other, and then again we just crowd control here and rinse and repeat. We go to the next node while that's down, stunning everybody there, and that's it. You just do this over and over, and then once everything is captured, you just go back to the middle where everybody was originally asleep, and you just keep casting your 2. That's it. You sit here, use a loot if you're taking shots, press 2, puts things to sleep. That's it. This is literally all there is to this build. It's a super cheese. It's crowd control. It is what it is. It works, so it's part of the video. So yeah, I would say Baruuk is pretty good. He absolutely kills things. He barely takes damage. He can crowd control the shit out of pretty much anything. And that's just how he is. He's really good. If you enjoyed the video or it helped in any way, please leave a like, and if you're looking forward to future content like this, subscribe and stay tuned. If I missed anything or you'd like to leave some feedback, leave it down in the comments. I appreciate all the support, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.